Welcome to Model Kit Stuff and welcome to a first impressions video. Today looking at Tamiya's Yamato in 1/350 scale. Now this is their latest release of the Yamato, which is the original tooling, but it came out after the new tool one. Eh? Confused? Let's sort this out. In 1979, Tamiya released the Yamato, and it's been a very successful kit ever since. Being one of the largest 1/350 scale ships that you can possibly buy, it's always sold well, and Tamiya have continued to re-release it over the years, occasionally adding a few new parts here and there, but essentially keeping the ship as it was originally tooled back in 1979. Finally, following 4 reboxings of the Yamato after the last time they'd updated the parts, Tamiya finally decided that they needed to bring their flagship warship up to the standard of their more recent ship releases. So, in 2011, they released a new tool Yamato, and fundamentally, the differences were an improved hull in terms of plating detail and so on, and some of their more modern approaches to how they put a ship together, which, to be honest, since 1979 haven't dramatically changed, but you get a harder plastic on things like all the masts so that it's stronger, and obviously, tooling abilities had moved on, so there was a little bit more precision and finesse in things like all the guns and bits and pieces like that. So they released it. So why, having released a new tool, all singing, all dancing one, in 2011, did they then subsequently release this? This kit came out just 2 years after the new tool one, and effectively it's the 1979 release, but they did change some parts. And when we go through this, I think we might be able to identify which parts they changed. So why did they do that? Why did they keep their venerable old kit still in the market, having released an all singing, all dancing new kit? Well, I suspect it's for the reason that I bought this and not the all singing, all dancing new one, because I only bought this last year. So when the new one came out, it came out with a new price tag. And as many of you will know, a 1/350 scale model ship kit is not the cheapest kit you can buy. And the Yamato certainly took that to new levels. So you were looking at around about £250, £280 in the UK for a Yamato when it came out, and you still needed, despite the fact that they were saying it was the ultimate version, you still needed some additional photo etch to get it over the line. So basically what Tamiya had done is they put some more photo etch and they'd added detail, but it was still had limitations of moulding. So you find that people are still adding better railings and photo etch details on top of that big layout. So I suspect that Tamiya decided that that was not in everybody's budget. So they re-released this, and I purchased this at a model show for £60. So even if I go out and buy a load of aftermarket for it, and I have bought some and we will look at that, then I think I can build a good, accurate representation of the Yamato for a fraction of the price of the other one and still have something that people will look at and go, whoa, that looks really cool. Okay, let's do a little bit of history. So the Yamato was ordered in 1937, and at that time the Japanese Imperial Navy was desperately trying to get ships in the water so that it had some form of numerical superiority, or at least parity with America and Pacific navies. It wanted to be the premier navy, and it couldn't always do that with the volume of ships that it was either having built abroad or built in Japan. So one of their strategies was to build big and to arm heavy, and the Yamato was one of those. Now, Yamato means great harmony, and unlike a lot of Japanese warships that are named after mountain ranges, this one's actually named after an entire province. And when she was launched, she became the largest and most powerful and most heavily armed battleship ever built. Her weight was 72,000 tons. Now, to give you some perspective, that's double that of the King George V class and around 20,000 tons heavier than the Bismarck. She was the first of two ships, and Tamiya do models of both of them, her sister ship being the Musashi, and she came into service with the Imperial Japanese Navy a week after the attack on Pearl Harbor, when Japan had immersed itself into the World War. Being the largest warship in the Imperial Japanese Navy, it's understandable that she immediately became the fleet flagship, and Admiral Yamamoto directed the Battle of Midway from her bridge. After Midway, Yamato was primarily engaged with chasing down and chasing off the American Navy, and her sister ship actually became fleet flagship. The ship had a major overhaul in end of 1943, beginning of 1944 roughly, from memory. Following being torpedoed by an American submarine and having to go in for repairs, they took the opportunity to upgrade her radars and add more armament. But in fact, she didn't fire her guns in anger until 1944 and the Battle of Liette Gulf. But she didn't do any real damage, and they were soon chased away by superior American air power, and being convinced that there must have been some aircraft carriers and therefore possibly a larger fleet in the area. So having turned and run effectively, things got even worse for the Japanese Navy as we entered 1945, and finally she was given orders to take herself and run herself aground to defend the islands of Okinawa and try and slow the American advance. She was actually ordered to beach herself and fight until destroyed, I guess, or until her ammunition ran out, whichever was the soonest. But she actually didn't get there. She was intercepted by an American aircraft from a carrier force, and she was sunk with the majority of her crew on board, and that was the end of the Yamato. So, as we look at the Tamiya kit, there is nothing on here that tells you what year the model is depicted, so I don't know whether it is pre or post the early 1944 rebuild. So I don't know whether we've got all the anti-aircraft guns on here and whether we've got the latest iteration of the radars. So a little bit of research would need to be done to know which model you're building, and therefore where you're going with any detailing that you might end up doing. But we have a very nice picture of her at sea, apparently on her own, and there's some nice weathering on there, and we can get to see some of the rigging. So in the top corner here, it tells us it's 1/350 scale and that it's 75 centimeters long. So she's a good old size even for 1/350 scale. It tells us at the bottom there that it's Tamiya and then it's 1350. It's in the usual thickness of a Tamiya ship box, so it's a fairly thin box. They're nice boxes for stacking, actually. We've got some history or technical information in Japanese, so I'm not really sure, and an image of her side on with her little bulbous bow and unusual shapes of the hull that she's quite famous for. The two ends of the box pretty much tell you the same as what is on the top, and if we turn around on this side we get a nice top-down view of her. So unusually for a Japanese ship, she's got wooden decks. A lot of Japanese ships were just all steel decks. And again, the information on there is in Japanese, so I'm not quite sure what they're telling us. Okay, so it's a bit too big to get on camera, this box, just about squeezing it in. Let's have a look inside. So when we open the box, we get the typical packaging for the older generation of Tamiya model ships. So this is how you'll get a Prince of Wales or the King George V or any of the older models that came out in the late 70s, early 80s. Quite different to the arrangement that you get now with the newer kits, Tone and so on. We have an instruction book. We have a full hull that's separated into some packaging to make sure it doesn't move about, and then we have the sprues and kit parts above it. So let's have a look at the instructions. So our instruction booklet is monochrome. It's A4 but landscape, and it is stapled. We have the box art imagery on the front, and then we have a side-on profile that's quite dark, but I think that's the one that's been used on the box as well. And it tells us the scale and the name of the ship. And when we open it, as you often get with a Tamiya kit, you get some fairly decent history, which actually is starting way back in 1917, I noticed. So, and we have a little map at the bottom there, which shows you her final journey to sinking and gives you a time and date. So on our next page, there's a little bit of history of Imperial Japanese paint schemes, telling you that they used basically the same paint schemes from the time of the Japanese-Russian War all the way to the end of the Second World War. Tells you what colours where, and then it lists the Tamiya colours that you will need to complete the build. Then we've got some tips for painting and masking and so on and so forth. Then we have the word of warnings before you start your build, and then we're into the build with a little recommended tool list along the side there. So we're starting step one with the original style of ship stand, which it's flat. So if your ship has got a flat hull, it's not too bad, but basically it doesn't fit anything. But, you know, it does lift it off the ground straight into the lower hull with the rudders. It's got 3 little rudders there, and then we've got the A-frames ready for the shaft lines. Now, I built the Yamato back in the 80s as a teenager, and some of this looks familiar to me, so I know that this is largely the original instructions that they're using, because I remember clearly this imagery. So what we've got is the gun turrets being built as sub-assemblies. That's the mains and the secondaries there, and we've got some of the radio communication spreaders and things on there. We've got individual guns, but you can't angle them at all because of the way they're mounted on there, unless, of course, you mess around modifying them yourself, which means modifying the blast bags as well. You'll also find that the detail on the rangefinders is fairly nondescript and basic, and just basically shaped lumps, and there's no detail in there. but we'll have a look at that when we look at the plastic parts. We've got separate cable reels going in, which obviously is better than moulded on, which they often do, even with their newer kits. But we do have posable guns on the secondary armament, which is quite nice. And you can see that they're designed to spin round. Now that means that you've then got to attach the guns onto the deck before the deck's fitted. So you may choose to leave them off and just plop them in and either glue them into position or leave them loose once you've finished, and that would be fine too. So a bit of detail going on the deck behind the breakwater there. And then as we move to step 6, we can see the first part of the deck going in, which is basically the forecastle and the forward part of the wooden deck, which has our 2 forward main guns. And then we have some ventilation and stuff going in, the capstans and so on. Anchors, quite a few davits of different types going in. And then we drop down to lots and lots of minor ornament going in there, anti-aircraft guns, light machine guns and so on. I would suspect that means that we've got the post-1944 refit version, and probably it's the Yamato as she was when she was sunk, if I was a guessing man. Down the side of the instructions we have little details that help you with the build, so like positioning the davits so that you can mount your ship's boat. So where you've perhaps got options, it's telling you how to go about that, and just little tips, which is what Tamiya has always done, and it's a nice little feature of their instructions, to be honest. But this is all very clearly laid out, and I'm not sure I'd be putting these on until I've built up more of the superstructure, but that's just preferential building process, I guess. So if we scrub down, we're now on step 8 and we've moved to the stern. So this is dealing with the area where we've got the ship's catapults. We've got that famous large crane at the back there, more ship's boats, the hangar, and so on. So we've got as I remember, this was movable. Yeah, don't glue, so you can actually pose the crane. Now they don't put any rigging on the crane, but if you you could easily put some EZ line on or something like that to enhance the look of that. We've got more minor armament there, the hangar doors, and then that deck's going in along with these deck areas here, which go in behind this, where you've got an opening you can see into, and we can see that there's detail on both sides of those parts. Then we've got the jack staff at the back, which has got all the little navigation lights on, and Tamiya point out the different colours that you need, which is good, because quite often that gets ignored by other manufacturers. And then we're building up a starfish there and a radar array, so that must be the start of the conning tower coming up. And again, on the side there, we're talking about some options and how to have the doors open and closed. The fact that you have to modify it slightly if you want it in the different positions. So that gets us to step 12, and as I thought, we're building up the observation deck effectively, and we've got the 2-part conning tower and then some bits going on, decks, bridge windows, or I'm guessing that's a clear part, I'm not 100% sure. Then we've got all sorts of range finders and the like going on, the wind deflectors. Then we build that up with the radars, more little gun decks, ship's horns or tannoys, something like that. Wooden ladders at the back, but given the age of the original tooling, that is no surprise at all. And for some people, that's good. That's how they want it. And some other little details with a nice little picture there showing you the line of the ladders to make sure that you've got them all correct. step 18, and we are dealing with more superstructure and more guns. This time the stuff that will be mounted on what is the centre section of the deck, but the rear of the upper deck, if that makes sense. We've got our funnel. We can see we've got some separate piping, and we've got a decal to go on there. I don't know if that's new. I don't remember the decal, but maybe it was on there. Searchlights and searchlight platform being built up for the funnel area there. Be interesting to see if they did anything to modify that cap, because that cap's quite a chunky funnel cap, as I recall. Then when we get to step 22, we're dealing with this back end deck. So we've got ventilation and detail going into the moulded on superstructure. Again, separate cable reels. Seem to have separate cable reels all the way throughout, and their more modern releases have a combination of moulded into the deck and separate. So they've almost gone backwards from this 1979 position, quite strangely. So yeah, forward superstructure, command tower, funnel, rear bridge, and then we've got the gun turrets going on, and then we've got the catapult arrangements as well, and we can see all the little rails that are common on Japanese ships for moving their aircraft about. So we're on to step 24 now, and we're back to building spot lamps and more armament. And I think it's probably worth going through the build process and reworking it slightly, because it makes no sense to paint some of these and build some of these and then do the whole process again. So you probably want to build all the armament at the same time, all the searchlights at the same time, especially if you're using aftermarket etch to prevent you from going backwards and forwards, and get it all through at the same time using the same paints, and you've got a uniform look. So the slightly unusual mast array gets built up out of several parts. You can see you've got this A-frame inverted at the back, which is all one part, and then we've got a couple of brackets that go on that main mast there, and then we've got radio loops and radar arrays to put on as well. Then we have a nice picture of what I'd call a museum style of model. So there's no weathering there at all. It's just straight painted, nice and crisp. But there's no life in it, I suppose. So it is a museum standard. This is exactly what the ship looked like at a base level. Here we've got a lot of rangefinders going in, gun directors and that sort of stuff, and then we're populating the back of the deck with more anti-aircraft guns and triple guns and so on. We've got some little pipe work and stuff going up at the top, and then we're adding the mast, and that's all been done before you've actually fitted the deck to the ship. So again, you might want to think twice about that. Step 28 is actually fitting the deck. You can see it just fits in underneath, but you will have a very visible join, and that really needs to be filled and sanded down a little bit. And if you're fitting a wood deck, you absolutely have to have that on before you fit all of this. So like I say, you probably want to rethink some of the build sequence of these instructions. Then we're building the aircraft. We can see here we've got two different types of aircraft being built. They come with trolleys, chunky plastic ones, not the nice photo etch ones that you get in their more modern kits. I'm sure in the newer Yamato that's resolved. But yeah, you've got the aircraft paint instructions and all the decals required down the side. So that's the most splash of colour you get on this otherwise very grey ship. Then we have the paint instructions, quite simple and straightforward. They're not on a separate sheet like they are these days. So you've got a side profile, top view. It's all in black and white. So you're relying on following the little arrows to get your colours. And it's suggesting 68 there, 66 for that. So all that white area is all the same paint colour, including the deck, so you don't really get any variation in there. Then we have some instructions around stretch sprue for putting your flags on. So that's an option. We do have, it's not quite a rigging plan, but it does show you some basic rigging that you could put on, including signal flags and the radio antenna wires and so on, which is more than they do now. So again, that's another step back that they took at some point, Tamiya, with their ships. So the instructions finish with your sprue list. They do have numbers against it, so you can cross-reference them if you take them off and not sure, or they've come off the sprue and not sure what they are. You will be able to identify them. You can see these greyed out parts aren't used. They are connected to when the model was first released, and you could put some big chunky batteries in and run a couple of motors and make the propellers go round. I mean, you couldn't really steer it particularly, I don't think, but some people would have maybe radio controlled it back in the day. So that completes our instructions. Right, we'll start with the stand. Everything is bagged up in mechanically fastened bags, stapled bags. The original stand that came out with their ships, which you'd get if you were getting a Prince of Wales or an Enterprise or any of the older ships, you get this style of stand. And basically you get two identical sprue, which has one half of your stand. So you have a little piece that goes underneath, and then you have that bit that slots on top, and your ship is sitting on there. And you can see it's perfectly flat. And it's also quite narrow, so you really want to be gluing your ship on if you're going to be using that. It's not thick enough for you to use a mechanical fastener to screw it into place. It does need, as you can see, quite a bit of work to be presentable because of all the ejector pins on one side. But if you build this up and tip it on its side, so it's resting on that point and that is up, it actually becomes quite a good build jig. So it's not the best looking stand in the world, and it needs quite a bit of work, and it's certainly not as good as their newer stands. You probably want to consider replacing the stand, but do try it as a jig. Put a little bit of sponge tape or something on it, so that you're not scratching anything, and it works quite well. Right then, let's look at the hull next, and the first thing you're going to notice is there's space in here for battery packs and bits and pieces, and that's how it was originally, and obviously they're not going to do things to change the moulding now. It's just redundant. You don't use these bits and pieces. The hull doesn't look too bad in terms of the moulding. It's still nice and tight. It's a little bit scruffy around the edges. It's starting to show its age. So around some of the details, we can see it's getting a little bit rough around the edges. So it is starting to show its age, but there is, it's just some gentle cleanup in fairness. We have a little marked line there, which is the demarcation between the grey and the anti-fouling red. It's a sort of a maroon colour for the Imperial Japanese Navy. And then we can see that we've got degaussing cable depicted as well. And some of that moulding is a little bit uneven now. So I would recommend removing that and replacing it with photo etch Tamiya Do a set, which is actually a really nice set. It's made from a sort of a copper alloy, I think, and it's really soft and easy to manipulate and looks really good when on. Our scuttles are nice and crisp, but there is no eyebrows, so you do need to look at adding the rain gutters above them all. And for me, the welded up scuttles are a little bit too thick. You could gently sand them down, or again you could replace them with photo etch. The scuttles here at where the bow is scalloping down, you can see that they're out of shape, so they need to be filled and re-drilled to look a little bit more accurate. Otherwise, not so bad. We've got some hand irons there. You could easily replace those with photo etch as well. And then we've got a moulded on anchor, and that in itself is nice and crisp. And to be honest, if you took that off and replaced it with a separate part, it wouldn't look that much different. So just putting a little bit of a wash around that so you've got some shadow would be sufficient, I would think. More hand irons there, which are probably best replaced if you can. And then we've got quite a lumpy bit of flash at the back end there that we need to sort out. Again, it's the age of the moulds, we wouldn't expect anything less. There's quite a heavy seam that we need to take away, running the full length of the model, and obviously there's quite a bit of sink where we've got all this heavy moulding inside. Even a little bit of damage there, but you're not. Most of the time, you're not seeing underneath the ship, so as long as it's painted in and it's presentable, it shouldn't be a big issue for you. What I would say is these are probably the wrong shape because of how they've been moulded. But when most people are looking at the ship side on, and when you look at it in profile, it's not an issue. So it depends on how much work you want to do on hull accuracy. Obviously, there is no plating depicted on this, and if you get the newer tool one, then you absolutely get all of that shown on the hull there. What Tamiya do is they run the lines along the length of the ship, but they don't break them up into individual ones. So some very, very thin plastic card, as thin as you can get, cut into plates and glued on, would absolutely make that look really, really fine. And that, again, that's all depending on how much effort you want to put into the hull. Now, for me, the bilge keels are a little bit thick. You could channel them out a little bit, but again, when you look at it in profile, who's going to notice? So it's all personal preference of the modeler. But you could clean this up, get rid of the seams, paint it up, and it would look relatively okay. Go through the rest of the sprues, how they're bagged up, and they're bagged in pairs. We've got a bit that's broken off of this one. So we're looking at sprue B first, which is this one. And on sprue B, we've got the two large side pieces that are inserts inside the hull, and you can see we've got lots of flanges there, and got lots of gussets and some welded up scuttles as well. I'm not quite sure what that is supposed to be. We'd need to look at some references to understand that. And then we've got the sort of the hangar area. We have some doors to put in there, but there is no texturing at all on that steel deck, which I would have expected there to be, similar to what we've got here. So what we've got here is a raised texture of crisscrosses, but the overall effect is not so bad. The moulding here is quite crisp. I suspect these are supposed to be ladders, but there is no detail on them at all. But again, you'd have to check. Removing them is a problem because you're going to be damaging the deck, so that's going to give you some issues, I would think. That'll be a redundant part. That's to hold a motor. And then we've got our rudder, and I suspect that might be the radio control rudder. I think we have better rudders if you're just using it as a display model. Not quite sure what that donut is for. We've got the front faces of the searchlights, and you can see they're a bit basic by modern tooling standards. These again not used, and then you've got couple of gutters, the small little third rudder, what look like little pulleys. They're not well moulded by modern standards, and our anchors there. So the mouldings themselves are nice and crisp. It's just showing its age. We can see some sink in there as well. So, you know, modern tooling methods and thought processes, you'd get a much more cleaner model than you're getting with these old 1979 parts. Right, this is sprue C. We've again got parts that we're not going to be using. We do have rudder, which is in 2 parts. We'll need a little bit of clean up just to bring it together, and then get rid of the seams and things. I think these are the shaft lines here. My gut feeling is probably replacing that with some rods so you don't have to clean up the seams and risk deforming the shape is probably the way to go. Then we've got some guns here, or part of a gun, base of a gun. They're not too bad, are they? Other than they've got hollow backs, so whether we fill those with another part, I don't know, but you wouldn't want to have the hollow backs, I don't think. The propellers themselves, they're going to need some careful cleanup because they're not as crisp as they used to be. Quite a bit of seam on there now. You borderline flash, really. The shape isn't too bad, but they are. I mean, they look the part, and when you look at the blade side on it, they're not too thick either. The ship's boats, they're as good as the ones that Tamiya do now, and there's no clinker on the hull or anything. The definition of the little bumpers is not quite as crisp as the more modern ones, but you've got a little bit of decking marked out on the inside there. You've also got ejector pin marks that you're going to have to remove. Get a little micro chisel in there is pretty much the only way. They feel a little bit soft moulded now. It's definitely showing its age, this tooling. These again, you've got these great big location lugs which really detract from the overall look of them. For me, chisel, remove them, or see if you can replace them with aftermarket or more modern ones that might look better. Then we've got the guns, and other than the fact that I've got some damage, I seem to remember I had damaged ones back in the day as well. They're quite crisp actually. They're not looking too bad. A little bit of flash on the ends of some of them. You can see there. So some very careful cleanup needed. But otherwise they look okay. And then we've got the little A-frames for the shaft lines, which need quite a bit of cleanup. There's quite heavy seam on them, and for me look a little bit oversized, a little bit thick. So it might be worth trying to thin them down. Look at your reference material, get an understanding if that profile shape is correct or not, and then perhaps remodel them a little bit. Sprue D now, and we've got a whole eclectic mix of parts on here. So if we start at this end, we've got parts for the mast. So we've got this A set frame here, which is quite nicely done. It's still a crisp moulding. We've got that goes on there as like a radio antenna, and then we've got the main mast section here, and that is nice and crisp. There's not much in the way of seam on there, so a gentle scrape of the seam and you've got a nice crisp mast. So mast doesn't look too bad at all. I suspect that's part of the tripod legs for the mast as well. We do have some like a ventilator there. It's not hollow or anything, so clean it up and paint the front end to make it look hollow. So we've got some deck fittings there. These are mesh ventilator covers, and on more modern Tamiya kits you get a really nice crosshatch texture on there, so these look quite basic in comparison. This is gun bases. Again, there's no texturing in there, so we'd need some aftermarket, some photo etch to sit in there and put that back into place. We've got more ventilator covers that need a better texture. Then we've got one of the main guns, and you can see we've got the fasteners around there for the base of the blast bags. We've got ladders and hand irons on there. There is some rivet detail on there, but not much. The moulded on ladders could be improved by putting photo etch ones on. It doesn't look bad, but I suspect that it's not as busy as it should be in terms of detail, and we've got a fair amount of sink in these little parts at the front here. I can see in the light, I don't know whether you can, there we go, it's just showing up there. So yeah, but not too bad. Then we've got some tubs there. They look really thick, don't they? I'm not sure what goes on the top of those, so that might not be an issue anyway. Then we have the front part of the bow there with the Imperial Marigold on there. Again, needs a little bit of gentle clean up. You can see the little two triangular lumps from the moulding process, but that should be nice and smooth. So then we've got some boxes, and they're totally featureless, but these would be ready-use lockers or something like that. So there should be some detail on there. The funnel, now in fairness, the funnel's not too bad. Now on a newer Tamiya kit, these would all be separate items, so that they're spherical. You may want to take them off and remodel them and make your own and put them on. It would be quite labour intensive to do that. It would actually be difficult to remove them, but you could do it from this point up. Easy enough with a chisel. It's this bit here that you might want to leave in place. The actual hand rungs aren't so bad. That's quite a good attempt at putting those on, to be honest. But yeah, everything looks a little bit 2D. The other thing you could do is get in with a scraper very gently and just scrape along the edge just to get underneath a little bit and round it off, and that would just add to the effect. Again, difficult to get into some of these though because of how closely they're grouped. But otherwise the funnel looks quite crisp. In fact, all of these parts look quite crisp. There's no real issues here. Then we've got rangefinder at the top there. Obviously we've got some more to go on the back. We've got some ejector pins to clean up. Well, that's not too shabby. Another part there, is that the back of that? I think that might be the back of that piece. Yeah, looks like it. We've got some hand rungs there to replace. Then we've got, that's the observation deck, isn't it? The spot lamps go on there, searchlight deck. So there's no texturing on that, which ideally we would want. And then we've got, I think that is the rear superstructure. So you can see you've got the shape there, but there is no detail on that whatsoever. It's totally smooth. And although we're probably putting bits and pieces on, there would be some form of texturing on there, conduit, cable runs and stuff. So I suspect that's quite basic compared to reality. Yeah, again, the same issue with the vents just looking a little bit basic. That goes on the back of the funnel, as I recall, or the front of the funnel maybe. It certainly goes around the funnel section. And then we've got the funnel cap, which isn't as bad as I remember it, to be honest. It looks a little bit chunky when you look at it side on, but it is hollow. I seem to remember it used to be blocked off, but that might be just how I'm remembering it. So you could come in and thin this out, get a power tool and sand all of this down and try and make that a little bit thinner so it looks more like a cage. That might be doable. Something I might attempt come the time. Yeah, I mean, the parts are crisp enough. There's no major issues there. It's just how much effort you want to put in to accuracy and detail, which dictates how much work you've got. You could build this together and have a relatively good representation of the Yamato. Right, sprue E, and we've got the main superstructure on there, and this does look busier than the superstructure we were just looking at. We've got windows in there, we've got some ventilation, and we've got hand rungs, various little bits and pieces on there. So there is some interest moulded into that, and windows and bits and pieces. So that doesn't look too bad. Again, I suspect it's lacking detail and texture that we might be able to put in as modelers. Then we've got I think those are the windows, you know, which I was hoping would be a clear part, definitely a clear part on newer Tamiya kits. So that would have to be painted up in a gunmetal windows or something like that. We've got some gussets there, and then we've got some other bits and pieces which we're going to stick on there, which go into these pieces for supporting various deck structures. So the actual look of it's not too bad. There is some sink in this piece here, which is some form of deck. I hope that's not visible because that looks dreadful. I'm hoping something just sits right on the top of that, but it's not on this sprue if it does. But yeah, I mean, it's totally smooth, so it won't be difficult. A little bit of sanding and possibly a little bit of filling needed on that. Then we've got the crane here, which goes at the back, and you can see it's just a slab, and we've got ejector pin marks in it, and it's crying out for a photo etch replacement. That it's not good, is it? These are the hanger doors. They're okay. They're not the most visible item on the kit, but you need to model these carefully, because what you don't want to do if you're showing the doors open is show that completely smooth side. Then we've got some more structure parts, which some of them have some really nice detail on. And then we've got the main radars here at the top. Again, photo etch replacements would improve them, but actually they're not too bad. There's details on both sides. There's no ejector pin marks. You could get away with a nice paint job and a bit of a wash on there. Nice to see that these have been done well. Yeah, they shouldn't be a problem. Got some plastic ladders there. Everyone knows my view on plastic ladders. I personally would prefer to see those in photo etch, but that definitely wasn't done in 1979. But as ladders go, they're not the worst I've ever seen, but they don't look great either. Some small little details there that we're going to put on right at the top of the radar array. They'll have to be removed carefully, but they're still very crisply moulded. There is a bit of seam on there I can see, but the moulding is nice and crisp. We've got the jack staff at the back there with the lights on. That's not too bad either. Yeah, there's nothing majorly wrong with all these parts, and you know it'll all fit together quite well, so yeah. I think we have something that goes across the front of there, and it may well be that part there, and that makes your wind deflector, so even that won't look too bad in there. There is some texture on those. Now, this is all your observation equipment, and there's nothing mounted on top. You've just got the bases, basically. But it does look suitably busy, and then you've got your spreaders sticking out of the back. Again, can just about see ejector pins on there, so a little bit of clean up, quite a bit of seam to work through. Other than a bit of clean up, everything there should go together. Because it's Tamiya, you'll know it'll fit together okay, as long as you've cleaned it up all right. So in the bag with the last two sprues is our flags. on this tissue paper. I'm not personally a fan of the tissue paper solution because when you fold them in half, you can see the witness of the printing on the other side if you've not got it perfectly aligned. So they are a little bit tricky. Also, they're a little bit difficult to hold into place. Now, I prefer the decals because you can put them on a bit of foil, or you can get aftermarket steel ones. Edouard do them, for example. If you are going to do this, then just take a little bit of care. But for me, the white isn't white enough, so they're not quite right. But again, it's personal choice that. Okay, the next bag had 4 sprues in them, and 2 of them were sprue F. So we've got 2 of these that are identical, and we've got our nameplate on. And for me, I actually prefer that to what Tamiya do now, because Tamiya give you some stickers to put on, and the problem with the stickers is, although they give you a choice of English or Japanese, they've got the Tamiya logo on and they've got the scale on and stuff, and for me that detracts, whereas this, it's got the Japanese on, it's also got the British on. For me that works really, really well. As a British person, I guess if you're Japanese, you might want the preference to not have the English on there. I can absolutely understand that, but for me that's a nice nameplate and I will definitely use it. What we've got on here is the aircraft. Now, obviously, if you're buying a more modern Tamiya one, these come as multiple parts, and this one does as well. They're not that far removed from what you currently get from Tamiya. It's just a little bit of cleanup and they'll fit together nicely. They don't have propellers, so you get photo etch propellers with the newer kits. So that might be something you might want to try and replicate yourself, or again, aftermarket. The plastic trucks for them, they look like what they are, plastic trucks. They're never going to look brilliant. Some photo etch ones would be great. If we can get some aftermarket ones, that would be really nice, I think. We've got some little deck fittings as well, and some pipe work and vents and stuff. And this is catapults. You can see they're solid as well. So again, aftermarket photo etch catapults. I know Tom's Model Works do catapults for Japanese ships. So if we can find out what type of catapult it is, you can probably replace those, and that would improve that. But you can paint the in between those and then dry brush that and pick out the detail, and it would look okay. We've got some more turrets, main and secondary. You can see them on there. So interestingly, these would have been the primary turrets on the Mogami, but then they were removed when they increased the gun sizes on the Mogami, and they ended up on the Yamato. Then we've got our main turret here, which has got the ready-use lockers on. There's no detail on them. I mean, it's the same as the other one, although we don't have the issue with the fronts here having some sinking. Then we've got, these are the rangefinders that go in there, and you can see we've got a heavy seam. I remember it's taking a lot of time to clean those seams up before. They're also hollow underneath, so you might want to fill those, bit of plastic card or something. There's a little bit of flash on them now. They're not as crisp as they used to be, but you can see the detail is just plastic lumps. So again, a little bit of aftermarket photo etch would certainly bring them to life, I'm sure. These parts somehow don't feel quite as crisp as the others, although they don't overtly look to be bad. There is a little bit of flash in places, but that's still a nice crisp moulding, which is your gun mount for that. You can see the raised panel details on the aircraft, so that's not so bad. I don't know whether we get decals like they currently do for the windows or whether that's just a paint them job. The two sprues in that bag are both G's, so we have two of these, and we can see that we're dealing with armament pretty much on this. So we've got the gun bases here and some gun tubs, and then we'll have some guns somewhere that will just flip into those. Can't remember whether you could move them about or not. I seem to remember there was some nice little detail on there, and although I've only got my reading glasses on, I can vaguely see it, so I think the mould has lost a bit of its crispness. We've got some sink in there that we're going to have to fill. It's nothing major though. These parts themselves, they don't look too bad either. And then we've got the main guns, and there is some nice patterning on the blast bags, which was always a nice feature of this kit. And there's quite a bit of detail gone onto the gun there at the base end. Obviously they're not hollow. You could choose to drill them out if you want, or just paint them as if they've got their gun caps on to keep the weather out. Take the seam off, and they're perfectly usable guns, although you'll be able to get aftermarket barrels from people like Master, I've no doubt. Okay, the next bag has our two deck sections, which are actually taped down together to stop them moving about, I guess. We'll just remove that. What we don't want is old tape on our top surfaces, because as you can see it leaves a witness. Okay, so let's deal with the forecastle, and we can see that the tooling is starting to get old. We've got some flash, definitely didn't get flash back in the day. So we've got a steel deck at the front with hose pipes that have got moulded in covers, a little bit of flash on there. There is sink that's visible at the front end there where these holes are, so I don't know whether we're drilling out holes for something or whether, I think that's rather to do with ejector pins than anything else. We might well lose that under paint. That might lose its visibility, but there's definitely some sink in there. Then it goes to a wooden deck. Now obviously it's a raised wooden deck, but it is done really quite well, and the planks are as thick as the raised caulking in between them, so effectively you could flip that on its head and say that the raised caulking is your plank. So for me, painting that and giving it a wash and maybe a little bit of a dry brush, and that would look perfectly good, I think. I think it's probably a better option than putting an overlay on where you're going to lose some of this fairly shallow deck detail. So something to think about, but we do have a join, so it depends on how that join goes. So I do see how a deck overlay could improve it, so I'm probably sitting on the fence with that one a little bit, but I think painting it you'd be alright. Obviously our details are a little bit chunky, and there is no actual detail on things like these hatches here, so again set a photo etch to deal with that would be handy. I mean, I'm not sure what they are, but they clearly never looked like that, did they, whatever they are. We've got a little bit of mould seam there that we have to remove. That will be difficult to remove, I think, and totally get rid of the witness, but yeah, it probably is doable. What you'd have to do is sand it flush and then take a very fine blade and drive it through each one of the lines to get rid of the plastic in between. We do have some moulded on cable reels as well, so they look dreadful. and as you know, Tamiya have carried on doing that, and it still looks dreadful. Then we've got barbettes, which are totally featureless, which I'm sure can't be right. And we can see, if we look at it side on, we can see that slope on the deck there that it's quite famous for. Then we've got the secondary armament. I know that we've got ventilators faces that go in there, but again, this is all totally bereft of any detail, and I'm sure there would be some. But the part itself, it's a little bit uneven now around the edges. You can see it's got a little bit lumpy. So you're going to have to just whip around that with an emery board and smarten that up, but you'll have no problems fitting it. You could easily remove the chain with a chisel and put a real chain on there, and that would improve the look of that. Drill out your bonnets so that the chain's going in. That would help as well. And then once you've got your capstans on, that wouldn't look too shabby, would it? So yeah, for its age, not bad at all. Obviously there's no gussets around the breakwater there, so there's quite a lot of detail missing. The other deck section, I mean, it's like a good old piece of deck, isn't it? I mean, the wood deck carries on in the same way as it did at the front, although there is some damage to it, but I think under paint wouldn't look too bad. You're going to have to get some rubbing alcohol or something to just clean these parts where they've put the tape on, and that tape has started to perish a little bit, so that's not great. We do have flash now on these parts that certainly didn't get when I originally built this, and some tooling damage and bits and pieces. But when it comes to the main superstructure, it's just a featureless lump of plastic. Yeah, so there is a couple of moulded on ladders, and that is literally it. So for me, I mean, there should be doors, windows, all sorts of stuff on there. I have no doubt there's trunking and all sorts, and it's just featureless. And Tamiya have improved on that a little bit, but they still have a tendency to do it. Yeah, you definitely need to do some research, and you might need to buy things like aftermarket watertight doors and things, and you might end up finding that you've got to add some detail on there, because I'm sure that is not a big slab of steel, featureless steel, on the real ship. Then we've got our mounting points for our rear armament, and lots. It's absolutely bristling with guns, this thing. And then we're on the steel deck area where we've got our tracks for moving the aircraft around and our catapult positions there. This would have been open on the actual ship. That grating would have been open. So again, I don't know if we can get PhotoX to replace that. I'm sure you can buy like a fly hook set or something like that, which absolutely goes to town on it. Yeah, I mean, that's not too bad, is it? Other than it's totally smooth, and I suspect that would have been textured, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I imagine it would have. I mean, these are all grey steel decks. They're not linoleum. They're not the brown steel decks that you often see. So I'm not sure. Research needed, definitely. But I mean, in terms of clean-up, it's just getting rid of these nubs and tidying it up on the edges so that it fits. Otherwise, it's all okay. It's crisp enough. Also in that bag was the decals, and interestingly, it's got a copyright date of 2001. So clearly these are an updated set of decals from what was originally in that. I certainly don't remember these rivet detail decals, which I suspect are to go around the guns. I actually don't remember these white letterings, but I might be wrong there. Most of this is aircraft decals. Tamiya decals are not great in more ways than one. Firstly, they're quite thick, though these don't feel quite as bad, I've got to be honest. Most of these should be alright going down, although these yellow ones need to fold over the leading edge of the wings of the aircraft, so they might be a bit of a challenge because they do feel a little bit chunky. The other thing is with Tamiya decals is they simply don't go far enough. There is no depth markings on here at all, which there should be. There would be other markings, so that all the ships, boats for example, would have lettering on them, which these days they could definitely do. And some of the other parts of the ship would have, you know, little signs. There would have been lettering on some of the turrets and different things like that. So I'm sure it falls short. But for me, the big sin is no depth markers for the hull. That's an easy thing to do and really brings your ship to life when you've got those on. So, yeah, it falls short. Not the best decals, but we definitely have a newer set of decals than the original release in '79. Our final bag has 3 of these sprue H's. Now, when I first opened the box, I wondered if this was possibly the sprue that contained the new parts, because it's the stuff that's all the small, fiddly, delicate parts, and adding some finesse to those would really uplift the model. But I don't think so. I recognise some of these parts from when I built it back in the 80s, and we can see there is some flash, which suggests it's not the newest of toolings. We've got quite a bit of flash on some of these parts, for a Tamiya kit at least. So I'm not convinced that these are new parts. So yeah, I'm not quite sure what the new parts are in that, to be honest. But anyway, we have some fairly delicate parts. All the gun barrels seem to be okay. We've got the little horns, whatever they are. We've got little struts there for the biplane aircraft. The quite delicately moulded the search lamps. So if they were back in '79, they look like they're improved to me, but I might be wrong. Yeah, these go on top of the turrets, and I always think they look a little bit wonky somehow. Yeah, we've got the little gun turrets there, and then we've got all these little minor machine guns that go on the deck. Cable reels, they're a bit basic, but they're better than the moulded in ones. And then we've got some davits, and there's quite a lot of those that are slung around the ship. So 3 of those. So I think you can see that my view is that the model actually needs a little bit of help now from the aftermarket boys, and with that in mind, I have the Yamato detail upset from Edward. This has quite a lot of etch in it, so let's have a look at that. It's not a big head, it comes just as this one pack. They do different Yamato photo etch for the new tool, so I'm guessing there's some dimensional changes in there possibly. But let's have a look at what we get in this. So our photo etch set from Edward comes with 4 frets of photo etch. There's an awful lot of photo etch in here. What we can see is a lot of it is dealing with adding deck texture, steel deck texture. Lots of gun ports and what have you are being covered off. The sort of the gun tubs and things are getting lined. So that's really nice to see. Some deck areas there, and I suspect the bit we were just talking about on the deck previously, where we said this should be grated and you'd be able to see through it, I think these parts here might just cover that off. We'll have a look at the instructions in a moment. We've clearly got railing to go round, much needed. That's going to really add something to the ship. There's quite a bit of railings cut to size in various things. I can see we've got new gussets, and we've got clearly a replacement for that big lump of moulded plastic, the crane at the back, and there's some finer details. Looks like we've got replacement ladders, which is good to see, and more replacement ladders there, and quite a few doors. So I'm hoping this is everything we need to get the Yamato to where we would want it to be. Let's have a look at the instructions. Right, our instruction sheets are the typical Edward instruction sheets. We've got separate double-sided printed colour sheets, and we've got 3 of them, so 6 sides of instructions here. Starting off with some work on the hull there. So we've got some photo etch blankers which replace the plastic ones, and we seem to be replacing that thing that I wondered what it was. We seem to be cutting that out because it's a ladder. So we're replacing that with an etched ladder, so that's really nice. And we seem to have some deck texture going on. When it comes to the main armament, we are adding more detail. I knew it was a bit bereft of detail. Lots of little handrails and things going on. Replacing the ladders. We're even replacing the bits that needed a little bit of work underneath of the 2 outside main guns there. I'm not quite sure what they are, but putting photo etch replacements in will absolutely enhance them. Then we've got the little step in and door replacing that plastic lump on the back, so that should be a nice improvement. We've got some parts going on and replacing the detail that was on the gun, so that's interesting. And then we've got photo etched cable reels, which is nice to see. And then we're moving to some of that very front end superstructure. So we appear to have ladders going on, some form of doors or shutters or something like that. You can see there's detail going on to the deck area there that was missing, so that's really nice. We've got a nice textured deck with railings going in and a supported ladder, so that's really going to bring that to life. And importantly, we've got the missing rivet detail. So these will be little strips of rivets going onto there and there, so that's really nice as well. We've got replacements for the moulded on sort of cross nice mesh front look to that, which will be a bit more accurate, so that's nice to see. We've even got some little gun sights for those tiny little guns, so lots of little detail to go on there, quite a bit of work. We've got some replacement gun tubs there, so that'll be really interesting. It has gussets, it's going to be a lot thinner. It's really going to bring that detail to life, I think. And then when we look at the deck here, we can see some of these sub-assemblies starting to be placed. Again, we've got detail going on the breakwater, although it doesn't appear that we've got gussets going in, so maybe it didn't have them, maybe that's just a feature. Got the rivet detail going on the barbettes, which is nice to see. That'll be going all the way around. You can see 12 pieces and it's only showing 4 of them, so equally distanced all the way around. More gun tubs going in, more ladders going on, and more detail onto some of these surfaces. Oh, I hadn't spotted that, but there's a little picture there showing you. Right, so each individual piece of photo etch there is a different number going all the way around. That'll be to do with the incline of the deck and the fact that they're different heights, I would imagine. So as we flip the page over, you can see that we're adding texture to all these upper surfaces here. We've got a little part going in there with the railings already on. Same at the back here, and a little section going on there, and then the main piece across there before we build more of the tower on there. So that's really nice to see. That in itself will bring a lot of enhancement to the model. We've got doors going on, ladders going on, more detail on top of some of the deck fittings, and we're replacing more of the gun tubs and more mesh ventilator fronts. So lots of texture going onto there, which will just raise the model up so much. More ventilator fronts, even more deck, and then we've got ladders, and I'm guessing they're life rings. Which would be white. I would think Japanese Navy. Need to check that though. some surface texture as well. What we've not got is any trunking and things like that on, so we're raising the level, but we're still keeping it to a fairly basic level. So I would still recommend doing your own research to see what else might have been in that area, because it should be a really busy area for me. Then as we move on, we've got more detail going on to the faces of, it's the other side of that we're now looking at. You can see that we're replacing those cable reels, hose reels, whatever they are. More rivet detail going on, which is nice to see, and more doors. Same treatment with the barbettes there. So that's the little vent that I said we'd need to paint the front to make it look like it's a vent and not just a lump of plastic. We've now got a textured front for that, so that will help. The guns that I said, we've lost the sharpness of the mould. We've got some photo etch to put it back and restore them, so that's lovely, and some railings, which will really help. And then we're dropping down into this stern area of the ship. So we've got some ladders and some detail to go on the inside of the deck. If you remember, it was just a smooth plastic bathtub, basically, with nothing in it. So the fact that we're putting some detail in is really nice. Looks like we've got catapults, so that's brilliant, and turntables, so that's really nice as well. We're removing some of the plastic parts to put photo etch in with better finesse, so that's really going to add. And I'm pleased to see that this big area here of plastic, just lump of plastic, we're now going to have some really nice fine mesh on, so that's going to look really authentic. New turntables going on, but we're not replacing those railings. You can get those as a separate aftermarket from Frst, I think, but very tricky to put on, I have to say. One or two more bits of deck texture going on as well. So yeah, first 2 pages, and we've really brought the ship to life in terms of steel deck textures, adding some ladders, and replacing some of the chunky plastic with something that has a bit more finesse. To the next page, we've got more details going on to the deck. So some of these little lumps of plastic are now getting some details added onto them. So front faces, top deck with more railing. Some of these items that are on the deck, that the moulded plastic's getting covered up or added to. We've got doors going on. The bonnets there for the anchors have got some photo etch detail going on, so that'll add some interest. And then we've got some hand wheels going on just behind the capstans there. Range finders and things getting their little shutters on and doors on, so that all adds to it. And then we're adding railing around the edge of the ship, much needed. And we've got the boarding ladders with the little hut on the top. So that's quite an unusual little structure. It's usually just open on most ships. So that's a nice little detail there, which will really catch the eye as you're looking across the ship there. So it is an option, because obviously when she's at sea, they're not deployed. But I think they always add a little bit of interest to the ship. If you've got a stationary and you're doing full hull, they always look quite nice on. Looks like the railings need to be cut to length a little bit more at the back. We've got little bits of railings to put in between the gun tubs, which will really make that look quite authentic, and then around the stern area there. Building up of the large prominent crane at the back looks quite complex. There's quite a few little parts going in there to make that up. We're having to add our own wire, and the only thing we're using from the original part is the little mounting point. Everything else is getting removed and replaced. So you can see the little mounting tube is the only thing that goes on. We've got some gussets and bits and pieces underneath it. So even if you're looking at it from the side profile, you'll see all those gussets. It will look really busy, really authentic, and of course it's all hollow. So it's a massive improvement on what you're getting in the kit. Over the page, we've got some work going on here at the stern, so we're actually adding parts that are not included in the kit. Whole section of platform here that's not included in the kit, so that's really interesting. Also, you'll note that they're removing the location lugs from the bottom of the jack staff there, which suggests that that is changing its position. So it would have been there, and looks like it's moving forward a little bit. So if that's the case, we've probably got some filling to do, so we're having a bit of a check of that. We can see the gun tubs here being lined with some photo etch to add texture to the decking inside. We've got some components going onto these plastic parts, which is going to help them look a little bit more interesting, and then we've got some front face parts going on, replacing chunky plastic with nice thin etch for some realism and some more detail. And lots going on to these guns here. You've got the radio antenna spreaders, you've got the little handrails that go up the front, replacement ladders, and replacement doors at the back. So quite a bit of work on those turrets, so that's nice to see. They should look quite authentic when done. You can see here we're replacing gun tubs again. Quite a lot of detail going on in the way of watertight doors, removing the platforms for photo etch ladders. You can see the line there that they're put on for alignment, which is really nice. And then there's some sub-assemblies going on, E and F. Alright, these are little platforms here being put into place. Very nice. Looks like we've got detail that goes on the top with railings and probably some deck texture as well. So that's really going to enhance that. When we come to the funnel, we've got deck texture for the searchlight platform, replacement ladders, getting rid of that little lump there to put the ladders on. We're not doing anything with the tubes by the look of it though, so it's just going to raise that area up a little bit, so nice to see. Then on our final sheet, we've got some missing platform structures being put together, which join the funnel and the superstructure together, so some walkways and bits and pieces, which is nice to see. And more deck texturing, railings and specific ladders there, so that's all looking right and accurate. As we drop down, we can see we've got some replacement parts for the front of the superstructure, the bridge area, main ladder going all the way up there. So that's a nice shortcut for you rather than having to go inside and up the stairs, I guess. More detail going on of mesh and railings. It's really going to look quite busy now that we've got this photo etch on. I mean, just look at this. We're replacing the radars. They didn't look too bad, but we are replacing them. We've got lots of railing going on there, and ladders and what have you. That's really going to improve the look of that once it's done. There's a little bit of plastic rod there. I'm not quite sure where that's going, but it has some photo etch on the top. Don't see where. Oh, replaces part E17. Fine. So yeah, that's going to look really quite busy, isn't it? And then what I said was just a featureless plastic lump. We've got some ladders going on. We've got some more mesh ventilation covers going on, railings going on. So that's going to help, though I suspect there's still more to be done there. Then on our main mast, we've got some added details, ladders that aren't included, some texturing for the deck, a little deck section there, and some nice photo etch antennas being attached to the side to replace the plastic parts that look like hand ladders. So some nice details going on there, and some improved brackets. Yeah, very nice. And if we turn this over to the last page, we've got more detail going on the rangefinders with little walkways and stuff, so that's helpful. Then we're sorting out the aircraft. So we've got propellers now, so that's nice to see. and we've got our little two-part carriages. So the model has this in plastic, but it doesn't have the top cradles, and you have different cradles depending on the aircraft. We've now got that, and I've got to say, from the look of the picture at least, these look better than the etch ones that Tamiya give you in the newer kits. So that's the instructions. Let's have a quick look at the parts. It's a lovely detail. I think this is a really nice comprehensive set. So if you do decide that you need to have a wooden overlay deck for your model, just need to be mindful of a couple of things. A lot of deck overlays come with anchor chain, and that's great. It can be really helpful. Particularly helpful is the fact that this one is black, and the colour that you're going to want to do your Yamato anchor chains is black. But bear in mind, you'll also need a thinner chain for locking the anchor chain, and also on the Yamato, the anchor chain gets tied off on the bollards as well, so just bear that in mind. Now, when it comes to wood deck, in the main, it's a natural wood colour, and I particularly like this deck because it's a little bit darker than many, and I think that just looks a little bit more authentic to me, and I think it'll go up nice against the grey of the rest of the ship. You've got to remember that the hull sides, all the superstructure and all the steel decks are the same colour, so there's a lot of grey on the Yamato. So this will help break it up nicely, and it saves you the task of trying to sort out the connection between the two plastic decks. Now the Tamiya Yamato shows at the end of her life, when she's got the most number of anti-aircraft guns, secondary armament and additional armament fitted. So it is possible to model her as she was sunk in 1945, but you could also model her in 1944 also. But, and this is a really important point, if you want to model Yamato battle passing through the San Bernardino Straits, then your wooden deck needs to be painted black. Okay, wooden decks, they're all much of a muchness. They all pretty much come the same. For me, have a good shop around and take a choice based on a combination of price and look, and try and avoid some of the more expensive ones, such as Pontos, which, although they'll fit okay, they don't look the best, and they are quite thick decks. So yeah, there's lots and lots of options when it comes to wood decks for the Yamato. Now, if you are thinking of buying into the older Yamato kit from Tamiya, then this is probably a must-have as well. It's a very in-depth anatomy of the ship, and that's going to help you do some scratch building and modifications to get it as accurate as you want to get it. So that is pretty much a definite need from my point of view. But also, I would suggest that you might want to look at some of these Hasegawa hobby sets, which have all sorts of parts in, which might upgrade those older tooled parts that perhaps lack some detail. So these are have all sorts of stuff in. There's several of these, I think there's at least 3 of these different sets which cover off different areas of fittings. They're handy if you lose things and for replacements, but they do quite often add more detail than the original kit. Even some of the new Tamiya kits benefit from some of these details. So consider what else you can get in the way of aftermarket updates sets. They're really helpful. And I'd absolutely say get yourself one of these Japanese utility boat sets from Tamiya. It's an excellent set. They are to a better standard than what they include in their kits, including the most recent kits, and they come with some photo etch and various other bits and pieces. There you have it, Tamiya's Imperial Navy Yamato in 1 to 350 scale. What is my first impression? Well, I can tell you when I built this back in the 80s as a teenager, it looked very different to any other ship I had on display when done. This massive grouping of superstructure and armament around it really does look impressive on your shelf and looks so different to any other ship where the superstructure is more spread out. And it's very different actually to any other Imperial Japanese ship where you've got these big towers at the front and then you've got a pittering out of superstructure at the back and ships, boats and stuff. I mean, there is nothing here but guns. So it looks very different. Even the sweeping shape of the forecastle and everything, it looks very different than any other ship you're ever going to have on display. So the actual subject matter is lovely. I think clearly the kit is showing its age. So even though Tamiya have not travelled that far in terms of what they offer in a model ship from 1979 when this was released to their newest releases of ships, there isn't a massive leap in improvement on what they do. You get better moulded detail on things like the hull, but they're still doing areas of the ship that have got absolutely no detail on whatsoever, and they're still doing plastic ladders, and they're still moulding on cable reels and hose reels rather than doing separate. So they haven't travelled a huge difference. Having said that, this kit is showing its age. It's probably the least detailed of any of the Tamiya ships that I have looked at, reviewed, or built at some point, and I haven't done them all. I can understand why Tamiya decided that they needed to update their flagship ship with a new tool. It just is starting to lack a little bit, and we can see that the tooling is starting to soft mould and flash up a little bit as well. But having said that, people like Revell will chuck out a kit for many, many years, and this might have another 20, 30 years of life in it. But increasingly, it's not going to meet the standard that a modeler would expect of a new release model ship. So you go into this knowing that you're buying a cheaper kit and you're saving yourself some money, but you've got quite a bit of work to do. Now, this has cost me a fraction of the new tool one. So can I build that with a photo etch and have something that looks as good as the new tool one? Probably. The main thing is going to be you've got to do some work on the hull if that suits you, as in putting some detail in with the plates and stuff like that. Again, do your research and make your choices. I mean, there's the booms, for example, are missing. So there is things that we can still add to this, I'm sure of it. And of course, you could add brass barrels to all of these guns, which would help with the crispness of those and give you probably a better scale look overall. Replace those flags for something that's got a little bit more of a flutter in it, and suddenly you've got a model that sings. So having said all that, with just the Edward photo etch and maybe considering some brass barrel replacements, would I now, having reviewed this, consider buying the £260 worth of new tool Yamato? Absolutely not. You can really make this look like a beautiful representation of the Yamato without going to all that expense.